Hello to niggas and niggas only. This is Marquise Davon. You already know what it is. And today we're going to talk about the need for escapism, especially a year after the passing of George Floyd. And there's been a whole lot of questions going around this week of like, what does progress actually look like? How's progress actually been made? What are these things talking about? And I kind of want to just take it from a different kind of angle because there's plenty of articles to read out there about what progress has actually been done. Not much. And so for those who don't know, last year on May 25th, 2020, this is when we witnessed Derek Chauvin actually murder George Floyd, an unarmed Black man, and the world could not deny the racism. America could not deny that violence. This moved people in a different kind of way. We've watched people rally in different kinds of ways. We've seen a call to defund the police, the opposition who were just like, well, you gotta use better language than that. And people who are just like, no, we need to actually have an honest conversation about what does policing actually look like in America. And I think that is the first time we've seen an honest conversation about what that can look like. But we've also seen our public intellectuals come back into the radical imagination. We've seen Angela Davis come back, Nikki Giovanni's conversations, James Baldwin, Malcolm X, the more radical side, which they like to suppress, of Martin Luther King Jr. We've watched all of this stuff come back. And it's crazy because their words still ring true today. And we shouldn't be surprised by that. And at least niggas that weren't surprised by it anyways. They couldn't deny the police violence towards Black people. The world was watching America at that time. And like, what does that mean today? You feel me? And since George Floyd's public lynching, police have killed 229 Black people since that time. So did they actually learn anything new? And then Biden's also passing this symbolic bill called the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which to me feels already suspect. Again, like I said, it is symbolic, especially because there were calls to defund the police and actually question, what does public safety actually look like? Are the police actually here to protect and serve? It's a great question. But it also feels like a way to negate the abolitionists. It feels like a way to negate a lot of our activists who have really been pushing, because we understand that police and policing can't necessarily be reformed. Biden and Harris seem more interested in reforming America's image and getting respect to the White House back again, rather than actually engaging in an honest dialogue around like, what does a new world looks like? What does a reimagining of public safety actually look like, right? It sounded good during the time, 2020, we were all talking about it, but then there were police departments who decided to defund a lot of their police. But now we're also starting to see like, oh, well, let's just give them more training. Let's just do this. We know that pattern of practice actually hasn't been working. And it makes me really question, why do they think this machine is going to work when it obviously has not shown that it's done anything for the public good? And it's been interesting because there just seems to be this distrust and this need to reform America's image once again back to what it used to be, which is extremely violent. That's the crazy part to me, right? It is still a very violent system. It's a violent country. It's anti-Black. And they're just like, yo, well, we saw this all happen, but we don't want to think about this thing that we did anymore. How much more are you going to invoke George Floyd's name? How much are you going to keep talking about Breonna Taylor? How much are you going to still talk about Dante Wright? How much are you going to keep talking about these things? And it's interesting because it feels like a lot of people are much more in tune with familiarity versus change. I think the pandemic forced us to think about what is familiar and how do we hold on to this as long as possible, when we was living a completely different lifestyle. So I see this idea of wanting to change. I see this idea of us wanting to get back to whatever normalcy is going to be. But how much do Black people actually want that? I know the streets is calling. I know a lot of us is doing it. And I think that's exactly why I think the Roaring 20s is making a comeback, because everything is opening back up and there's this hope that we all want to get back to that. The media stop talking about police violence as much. COVID-19 is getting talked about less and less. And our focus on race specific discussion, it's been decreasing in different spaces unless people are being very intentional about what's going on. I think critical race theory is under fire, and I think all of this is actually done by design. America is currently in a space where they don't want to have to reckon with the worst parts of the country and 2020 as a whole, because 2020, that's a big stain. And they don't want to get rid of it. And we could not deny the violence of whiteness. We couldn't do any of that stuff. It was out there in the face. Even white people was feeling it. Now, I think a lot of these white people are also trying to get back to what they wanted to get back to. A lot of them also didn't learn, because 55% of y'all was still acting out of pocket. But again, it's why I think we're starting to see politicians, Biden, Harris, Tim Scott, all say America's not a racist country. Discussing race shouldn't be held in schools. And Biden's team's still trying to repair the White House to what it used to be. And that shit don't make sense to me. It really doesn't. All of this feels like a way to promote less thinking and reminding of America who we were before. So we want to be the fun country with all of the distractions possible, returning to our 9-to-5s, no longer thinking about our neighbors, no longer really indulging in our American individualism. You feel me? So again, I do think that the Roaring Twenties has definitely returned, and I don't fault anybody, Black people specifically, for wanting to indulge in a little bit of escapism. I think it's actually necessary for us, because let me tell you, it's hard out here, right? But I do sometimes worry about like how much escapism is going to impact how we are still paying attention to policy, how we're still paying attention to the fact that protests are still happening to this day, what else is going on in the world, because this is the first time I felt like there was a global approach to how America was thinking about what is going on in the rest of the world, how America shows up in these other countries, right? Because we love imperialism, let me tell you. But I think it's all important that we need to continue to hold America accountable, making sure that we are still taking up space, making sure that our voices are still heard, making sure that we're still advocating and protesting, especially for those who are doing a lot of this work on the ground. People are still dying. Police violence is still happening this year. Reform is not going to be necessary. I know we want to all indulge in trying to get away from our reality, but we got to keep it up. Keep applying pressure, do what we need to do, and still find them pockets of joy, but just know that we have work. But what do y'all think? Peace.